Alright, and this is part 8. We'll take a look at where the boosters can actually fit inside this shell. And there's not a lot of places. This is the only place that I could find. And the orientation of the booster is such that the antenna port is pointing out towards where the motors are. It actually worked out pretty handy because it needed to run the cable down through the plastic. But the two power leads coming from the regulator, and here's another regulator that I had just sitting here loose, but the power leads come from the regulator into the booster, and it's all pre-soldered in the kit. But there's not enough room to get those wires up and over this internal rib in the shell. Now, especially on plastic this thin, I don't want to do any more cutting than would absolutely be necessary. So rather than remove that bit of plastic, I chose to just fold those wires over, and there was enough clearance, but it's tight. But again, being very careful not to break the wire, because the solder will run up the wire as it's put on, making them brittle. But fold that over and then slide that booster down in between these two alignment bosses and the stiffening ribs where the screw hole is. There's a look from the other side of it. And again, this is the wire that's going to be plugging onto the chassis, and then this wire or cable will go to the antenna. Just to try to hold things in place while I figured out the cable routing, I wrapped a zip tie all the way around the leg to hold that booster down in place. A little later on, I had to revise that method a little bit, and it turned out to be a permanent mounting system using a zip tie. The landing gear bolts up right below this booster. So what I did was ran a zip tie up through the hole, around the booster, and then back down through the same hole, and then plug hook the two ends of the zip tie together. And that clip on the end of the zip tie is too big to fit through the hole, so it held the booster down in place while keeping the strap itself internal to the drone. In this case, I ran the cable out and around. I had some extra cable I had to eat up, so I just looped it around the leg, and then that's the end that will plug onto the chassis. There's another view of the same thing. Now, the existing antenna cables are held in place by little clips in the plastic, and also I guess we'll call it Scotch tape, clear tape. I tried to be careful and loosen the tape so that I could reuse it when I put the new cables in place, and that didn't really work out all that well. The tape seems to lose its stickiness, but it's there, so either replace it or try like I did and reuse it. But the new cables were a little too big to fit down in these clips, so I did have to open them up a little bit with the side cuts, and I'll show you those pictures here in a little bit. But that allowed me to route the cable essentially the way it was stock. So here's the first booster that I put in, and as you can see, this is the rerouted zip tie. And also note that I had to take this green ring, and I know it's an interference, what would you call it, interference breaker at any rate. I needed to roll that on the power lead up and tuck it down in beside the booster. The other booster fits in the same place. Just there's not a left and a right booster, though there's a left and a right leg, so it fits in there almost the same. The difference being the wires that I had to fold over on this booster folded over towards the tin top. And these wires seemed a little bit more fragile, so I just wrapped a small zip tie around the booster and the cables to hold them in place. But once that's taken care of, the power leads come out the same way on both sides. Here again's another shot of it with both boosters down in place and partial antenna routing. I don't have them where they ended up completely, but they're in the ballpark. Now, here's where I had to clip these little passages a little bit so that the new cable would fit down in. Of course, you can clip closer to the chassis or further out to the edge. Further out to the edge will make it weaker. Closer to the chassis will maintain the integrity. So I clipped a little bit towards the chassis, or towards the outer part of the shell. Clipped it with the side cuts, and then took the tweezers and bent it back and forth until it fell off. Then I clipped probably a 32nd of an inch there. I wasn't real specific. There, I'll zoom up on that a little bit. That's before I clip. And on this, I don't remember where this one is, but on this one, you know, there's not much of a choice there. You've got to clip the bigger one if you're going to make that hole big enough for the new cable. Oh, there's a shot of the zip ties. I didn't attach the zip ties right away. I just used them to hold those boosters down in place so I could still move them around if I had to. Now, I don't want to drill any holes in my drone body. Drilling holes has the potential of fracturing the plastic and making it weaker. I also happen to think it doesn't look that good. So I wanted to route my cables where I could down through existing openings. So for the two cables that don't have the boosters, I routed them down through the antenna wire passage, same as the existing wires were. But in order to get them outside, I had to do something with that little cover. So I just used my soldering iron to melt a hole through that little clip. And again, I melt instead of drill because, well, for two reasons. One, so I don't catch that piece of plastic with a drill and break it. And also, melting through leaves a little buildup of plastic around the hole, which adds some strength. And that allowed me to pass the part of the cable that clips onto the booster through the plastic cover up through the hole. And here I don't have the battery bracket installed yet. This was just a test fit, but that's how I got these cables outside of the body without drilling any other holes. Now in my case, these two antenna leads are for the receiving antennas, not the boosted ones. Now this is a shot after I had the battery bracket set in place, and here you can see what I did with that zip tie. Just running it up through the hole, in this case down, but through the hole, around the booster, back down, and then clipped it together. Cut it off tight, and that left enough room to get the little covers back in place. That's what it looks like from the front with the clip snapped in place. Now for the cables that go to the transmission antennas from the booster, just the way I put the boosters in there, about the only place I could run the cable out was through these screens. Excuse me. And it's just it's a regular, very fine mesh screen. So what I did is just start working it with my sharp-pointed pick. And I don't show it here, but I did lay the tweezers down over top of that screen just to hold it down, because these three plastic tabs are all that hold that screen in place. And it looks like they put the screen down on and then melt those three pins a little bit to hold it in place. So I didn't want to destroy that. But once I got the small pick through and wallowed it out a little bit, I then used that this tool back here, that plastic pick that came with my soldering iron, just to make the hole big enough to get that fitting up through to where I could plug it into the booster. And by doing that without cutting it or drilling it, but just basically wallering the hole out, I don't create any sharp edges or sharp points in that screen to cut into the cable. And that's what it looks like from the bottom side. And here are both boosters in place with the cables attached, pretty much routed where they're going to go. And I've got the two regulators laid in place. They can't actually go in the lower half because that's where your forward vision positioning sensor camera system's set, but that's the way the cables ended up running. Now, one of my booster sets had 2 wraps of wire around this interference knocker. The other had 3. I guess this one had 2 and this one had 3 wraps. With 3 wraps, I couldn't get the booster all the way, or the transformer up where I needed it. So I had to cut the wires, unwrap one loop, and then solder them back together. It's hard telling. Yours may have 2, 3, it could have 4, it could have 1. Don't know. Just all depends on how the assembler decides to install it there at FPVLR. Then we'll next take a look at what it takes to get some juice.